Television, can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chairwoman Representative Anastasia Williams.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Representative Edith Agello.
Present.
Bella Robinson. Robin Lind. Justice Gaines. Charlotte Peters. Dr. Philip Chan. Michael DeLauro. Here. Kyla Pecchia.
Present.
Elena Shee or Lily Pickett. J. Lee Oshiro Brantley. Henry Binks.
Present.
Sidney Wardell.
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guests. Today, I want to pretty much recap where we have been. I would call on individuals that, commissioners that have been present, participating, but haven't heard much from, and pretty much some of them are not here today for whatever reason, but I didn't want to go too far along without coming back and recapping what has been presented to us, what we heard, our feelings, and so forth. I will call on the individuals to speak on what we all have learned from their viewpoint. I also want to apologize to anyone who was unfairly put in a predicament of the media. It was totally uncalled for, not deserved, but I rest assured it wasn't I who created the incident or looking for attention. My clear intention for this commission is for us to fairly have a dialogue with individuals from both sides, top, bottom, around, wherever, so that we can clearly understand and respectfully understand. This is not a show for one individual to feel that it's their time to shine. Last I was clear and seeing, the sky is comprised of many stars, and that's what lights it up. Just not one, but many. So anyone who feels that they need to shine, in fact, bring it out to the public on social media to say that it is their effing time to shine, it's not appropriate for this commission, because we are on a mission to uncover the truth, the facts as they are, not as some individual wants them to be or feels that it is their time to shine. So I say all that respectfully because I respect the folks who have given their commitment to work together on these important issues, both sides, all sides. And I look forward to bringing on the individuals who are opposing this commission and its intent. Because I would like to, I'm going to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. There aren't any specific stars on this commission. This commission is comprised of individuals that are committed to justice, fairness, and equality. So when one takes and puts us in a bad light for their own personal interest, it makes us all look bad and makes the task even harder. This is not an easy subject, an easy matter to deal with on any level, but for anyone to feel that their opinion is the opinion is totally unfair to all of us who are working collectively and together. No one, I repeat again, no one on this commission is being paid to be on this commission on any level, for any reason, for anything at all. It's committed individuals who have the interest to help, to bring truth to power, facts to life, and it's going to be comprised of many individuals, not just one star, but many of us stars. So I am grateful for all of you that are here and those that are not here for stepping up and doing the right thing for the right reason. And I'm looking forward for us, when we get to the finish line, that we will have a product that's comprised of facts, and it'll be comprised of everyone's voice, not just one individual on any level for their own personal gain and interest. With that, I want to utilize today as an opportunity for us to go back and talk about what you have gotten from the presenters that we have had here, what came about, how you feel about it, however you want to present it. But it was my hope to call on those who are been attending, participating, but for one or two or whatever reason feel that others are making their just presentation in the manner for which they would do themselves. But I want to hear from everybody. So please don't feel that I'm picking on anyone to say, I need to hear from you. I want you to be comfortable enough to want to give your opinion, because it does matter to me and it matters to this commission's responsibility and goal. So with that, I would start with Justice Gaines. I know Justice probably like, what? But yes, I want to hear, we want to hear, and I would love for you to share some of your insights to date.
Thank you, Rep. Williams. I was just going through my notes to figure out what I had to say. Yeah, so one, I've been thankful to be able to be part of this commission with such other great members. I think we've had really incredible guests and also really incredible feedback from the commission and good questioning. A lot of the things I've picked up so far is sort of just recognizing a lot of the impacts that criminalization has had, which seem to really target a lot of the folks who are sex workers, a lot of folks who are engaged in this industry, particularly the women and the marginalized individuals who are engaged in this industry without real regard for the context or the circumstances. It doesn't seem like our laws as of now give way or give room for the nuance, complexity, and agency of many of our residents of Rhode Island who are looking to engage in sex work in some way, or who are looking to receive sex work. I think it's really important as well in acknowledging that we have heard a little bit about different models that we might take on, whether that's more full decriminalization, which I will say is something I support, more of a Nordic model which tries to criminalize demand. And so something I can say right up, right, is like, I have been a client of sex work, and I would prefer not to be criminalized for that. I think many of us here have been clients of sex work, even if you don't quite know that. I saw a movie on Netflix yesterday that might have made me a client, frankly, because it was intense. But I think I do have some questions, but I also am happy to talk more. I think those are questions amongst the commission, so if there's more room for discussion at the end of the meeting, I'm happy to discuss more then.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Thank you, Representative Williams.
I think one of my biggest takeaways from my time on this study has definitely been not only the nuance and several complicated interweaving factors that go in with the subject of decriminalization, but also how much of other aspects in the criminal justice system is built up around the criminalization of sex work. And I believe that any model that is generated by this study would have to take that into effect.
Thank you. Sid?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think that the biggest thing that I take and have had the opportunity to do, obviously you all know that I'm from the law enforcement side of the house, is to be given the opportunity to hear individuals that have chosen to do sex work and feel comfortable enough to talk about it, because usually my contact would come from individuals that would be in some way or another not necessarily doing it fully of their own free will. So it's certainly given me an opportunity to take that into account. You know, although I may be in law enforcement, I'm pretty open on allowing individuals to live their life and to do things as they want. Sometimes that runs afoul of what my job and responsibilities are. But I think I'm here and have been with an open mind. I still have a lot of, I have hesitation, I guess, to say that I would fully support the idea of decriminalization. But I think we're in a place and time and understanding that you know, there's a lot more questions and a lot of need out there to support individuals that do choose this type of work. So I'm still, though, you know, very much in need of a lot of information to be able to make a decision and off of what I guess has been my base of 30-some years in law enforcement. So I think it's 34.
Okay.
Somewhere in that area now. But and more specifically working now in the last 6 years of my role as the executive director of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association. So, you know, that brings in all of law enforcement, bringing everybody together. I'm certain probably Madam Chair put my name out there to specifically be here, but I welcome that. But again, I think I'm in the same boat as Justice had said, that, you know, moving forward and having questions and being able to have dialogue is needed by everybody to understand this, you know, the seat that we all sit in, and respect each other's choices and wills of what they do. So looking forward to more hearings and having more individuals that certainly are speaking from their perspective of this topic.
Thank you. Kayla?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Do you mean Kyla? Thank
Kyla,
you.
I am sorry.
That's okay. Quite all right. It happens more than you think. I think, you know, as everybody is likely aware, I'm here as a representative of the Attorney General's office. And I think, you know, it's been really interesting watching all of the presentations, and I think that we are very appreciative of being part of this commission, as, you know, similar to what Executive Director Wardell said. And we certainly appreciate the goals of the commission, and, you know, again, we're happy to be a part of the process. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the charge of the commission is to produce some type of legislation, or I think that's the goal, and I could be misspeaking, but I'm remembering what the resolution was from last year. So again, looking forward to more hearings and hearing from different perspectives. I think that also helps our office when we weigh decisions that we make there, and we're certainly looking forward to being part of that process and weighing in that process.
Thank you. I would also like the record to reflect that Elena, she is present with us. Thank you, welcome. Just to kind of bring you up to speed, we are recapping on what we have heard, and what I am looking to do, my intention today is to identify the individuals, or not so much identifying, but pick on them somewhat, kind of to hear from them and what they have gotten from the presentation, and if they have any questions and so forth, just to share and give us like a recap to date of where they're at. And if you would like to, please proceed.
Presentation because it really put in historical context in a way that I hadn't heard before, specifically like historical Rhode Island context, how long this fight has been happening. So I think we all know how interesting Rhode Island is as a case because of the particularities around the recriminalization of indoor sex work. But I think that like the longevity of that fight and really the historical overview that Steve was able to offer really like illustrated to me the abundance of everything we need to know. I think that Phil Chan's presentation probably gives us very strategic ammunition for a more mainstream audience that maybe doesn't understand decriminalization, but to attack these arguments or to sort of talk about decriminalization through its public health implications is definitely a way that we can communicate, I think, to a larger mainstream audience. So I think that, as a researcher of anti-trafficking and a supporter of sex worker rights, I have often felt like in a very, very small corner where decriminalization doesn't seem to be a possibility, except in this amazing state where it has been a possibility in the past. And I think that both the history that Steve Brown provided and like the kind of overlaps to ongoing work that's been happening in public health really show a lot of possibility for what we might be able to do here, and how that might set a very, very critical like national precedent. So I think that Rhode Island is in a special place. I think that we have the right people who've been doing the work, and I think I'm excited to know what our commission is going to do.
It's a lot of power right there. Yes, yes. We're going to do great things, but we're going to do it together. That's the main thing. Thank you very much. Madam Vice Chair, I would like to hear your perspective, please.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I spent some time yesterday in the late afternoon looking over some of the committee documents, and I was quite struck by the information about New Zealand and how they're doing, having decriminalized sex work, and really would urge the committee or the commission to look further into what's happening in New Zealand. I think that's potentially a good model for us to look at. And the other thing is that I was so struck by and continue to think about Dr. Chan's testimony and the public health impacts of the criminalization of sex work, and our ability to compare sexually transmitted disease incidents pre the criminalization of indoor sex work and post, and that number isn't good. We're not going in the right direction. And also, the incidence of rape has increased since we've outlawed indoor sex work. And those numbers don't look good. I think that maybe we should look at them more and look at how things look in New Zealand, I really would like to look at what's happening in New Zealand. And because I think that could be a good model, and I agree heartily with the fact that Rhode Island is small enough and we have a good group of people here who bring a variety of perspectives to our commission's work. I think we could be a model for the country, and so let's do it.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. At this time, I want to circle back to Mr. Wardell and ask if you could share with us 1, 2, or 3 questions that you may feel necessary for us to engage in at some point in time that of concern of yours as a lawmaker. And you could even if you have your own personal, I welcome that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's be clear, I'm not a lawmaker.
Sorry, law enforcement officer. I am sorry, even though, hello, it's all intertwined.
It is. And I like to think that when I come before the committees and give factual information based on law enforcement's, what we've observed or perspective, it assists the lawmakers in making those decisions. So it's kind of unique that I'm sitting in this seat now to possibly be a part of any legislation that might come forward. So that's really where my questions lie, is locations that, such as New Zealand or others, that have done decriminalization, is statistical information that goes along with that on what happens and what has happened to individuals that, because of that, what has increased or what areas of decrease have we seen based on victimization, based on, health, and being able to, supply information and whether it be products, whether it be doctors, whether it be any of those other things that, help us to alleviate any type of sexual diseases and so forth. So, I mean, that's a little bit out of my law enforcement realm, but, it's in general idea of what we're looking at is what is the health benefit, or is there an impact on the health of society? So obviously my main focus, though, is in that area, what data can we give to show reduction, which is I think where we're leading on this if we go for decriminalization, what areas has it proven out to reduce victimization? I mean, that's a real big and broad word for victimization, but I think under that umbrella is what can we show that has helped. We know that based on information that we have now about trafficking, human trafficking, all of those sides, what impact does that have? What things that have been done in other locations, if we were to do that, could we do better, right? That's always the things that we see from the studies, is there's no one shoe fits all. But as we go along and, we're getting ready to do it in some other legislation real soon out of this building, we should be learning from those other states or countries or otherwise that have made these choices to do that. Coincidentally, Rhode Island, as it's been stated by a couple folks here, we've been on both sides of that situation, right? And I think we probably need to look at a little bit from Rhode Island as what has happened because of that change. And I don't think I've seen anything study-wise that showed exactly where, what that impact has had on Rhode Island. So I think that's, that's something maybe we try to look at. And I'm not, one of the toughest things, and I know Kyla being here with the Attorney General's office, in looking at some reporting and statistical information, there's just not a lot of it out there from the law enforcement side of the house And maybe that's something that, you know, we can also look at and try to bring forward. I hope I'm not setting myself up as presenting something, but it's something that from the law enforcement side of the house that we certainly need to look at. I know of no such information that's been pulled together to this point. So that's where my main questions are.
There hasn't been, thank you very much. There hasn't been a lot of, there has been a lot of information brought forward, but the information has not been broadly shared because folks, you know, some folks are squirmish about reality, about, hello, you want to have sex? I mean, people are like, oh. But at the end of the day, with all due respect, sex is good. Sex is something that almost everybody has encountered one time or another. So to not discuss it or to feel squirmish about it, it's the individual's experience and right. Wouldn't try to take that away from them. But talking about it should happen regardless of your position on it, about it. It needs to be talked about. You know, folks, some people prefer not to talk about it because, and that reason is left for them to define. But just because doesn't mean that it shouldn't be, so that others who have no problem with it, and I mean no problem with it in a respectful manner, should be able to do just that, to talk about it freely and openly, respectfully, without anybody, you know, casting judgment on them, like the A letter on their forehead. You know, it's like, it's a conversation that should be had, can be had, and open to be had, just like anything else, like dinner, what you having for dinner. It should be just a normal conversation. And I think we are at that place in society where those conversations can and should be had, and folks to not feel one way or another with it, but it's a conversation. Go ahead, Sid.
So just to, you know, we've heard about it in many different topics. The one thing with law enforcement is the information that we bring to the table is usually not an open conversation, because most people don't openly have a conversation with the law enforcement when they're in whatever the situation, however they get to be in a position where they're sitting side by side or across the table from law enforcement. We don't necessarily get which would be the 100% truthfulness of however that person is in their situation, whether they choose to be or don't choose to be or so forth. So I just put that out there for you to understand that, you know, that's why independent research, and me hearing it as a law enforcement person, hearing independent research, sometimes it contradicts with what we may come across, but many times it's because people don't open up usually to law enforcement to give you the true, you know, this is my situation. So, you know, that's more of a, I guess, me saying to the group, you know, I know that, I recognize that, and that's why we have to depend on individuals that do independent either research or individuals that come before us as individuals to give information. So, you know, unfortunately, we can't bring that to the table. We can bring statistical information based on most often an investigation or a victim, or in that sense. But again, we know it's not the whole story, so.
And I'm so glad you said that, because there it is. You opened up the door for me to say that individuals come before law enforcement, and there is no relationship or trust for that individual, that sex worker, to want to freely talk about what transpired, what they just went through, because of the fact that there are so many law enforcement officers who in their daily lives, they don't accept that type of lifestyle. So therefore, they're going to treat you a certain kind of way just because that's not their way or their exposure or their interest or their whatever. So therefore, when anyone comes to you from that place and know the experience that themselves or others have had with law enforcement, they're not going to be free and willing to tell you the whole story, because you can feel it. Just like, you know, being a woman and being a woman of color, I can feel racism. It doesn't have to be an act, outright act, for me to know it. It's a feeling. It's body language, it's tone, and a lot of other things. So if I encountered as a sex worker a bad experience and I feel the need to come to law enforcement to say, look, this transpired, this is going on, or I witness something transpiring and law enforcement needs to be made aware of it because it's happening repeatedly, they have to have that relationship of trust to be able to communicate, have that communication, and not be judged automatic. And that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening because of the law enforcement individuals that have not engaged, don't believe, have no tolerance and respect for that lifestyle. So that would be, for me, one of the reasons why many sex workers don't come forward. And it's just one. There's a list of other things, other reasons. But trust, communication is a big part of not being able to and willing to come forward and tell you the whole story. And I'm glad you brought that up. You know, and I'm not saying that it's you, but you're basing your statement on your experience, and as open and willing that you are as a person. When I go in to see you as a sex worker, I'm seeing all of those other Joe Rockheads because you're one of the blue, not because you are the bad blue, but you are one of the blues. And I'm just saying that respectfully, and I know you know that. I see Henry wants to jump in. Jump in, girl. Jump right in.
I just wanted to flag something really fast. You spoke about how you wanted to see some of the research results in places in the world who have decriminalized sex work. It's not uncommon that initially after a decrim bill is passed, at least in the research and conversations I've had, that you do see an uptick in reports of things like trafficking, sexual assault, etc. But this is because the shadow demographic is allowed to come forward and seek protection without fear of punishment. And when you do this research around decriminalization, I would just urge, you know, not just you, but everybody in the room who is curious on that fact, to keep in mind that people risk a lot when they come forward and say that someone has come to harm them, especially within a marginalized community that is historically silenced, like sex workers, like people of color. So yeah, I guess when you see these demographics and you know, so we have this conversation with anti-trafficking organizations all the time. They'll say, you know, places that have decriminalized have increased rates of trafficking. What you're seeing there are victimized people feeling empowered to seek justice in a system that was formally targeting them too. And I think that context is just really, really vital when we're having these conversations. It's not as black and white as sex work was decriminalized and everybody got trafficked. That's not what's happening. That's the farthest thing from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I would like to hear from Justice again, simply because she made mention that she had some questions, and I would love to put that on the record. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think coming up from this conversation is sort of the biggest question I have about what we are going to produce as a commission is less on my end how we're going to decriminalize and hopefully support sex workers and folks engaged in the industry and our general population as a result. And I am starting to come to this question of what is the role of law enforcement going to be? Because unfortunately, all the reasons you said, Rep. Williams, are true, but it's also true that police officers are ultimately just doing their job. They're doing their job by criminalizing sex workers because that's what our state has decided to do. And so it's not just a matter of discomfort or personal experience, it's a matter of law enforcement has been put in the place to be the opposition to sex workers, to the sex work industry. They have been put in a place where they are targeting and they are harming our community members who are sex workers. That is their job. And so how do we remove that from their job? I don't think anyone here truly deeply believes that police officers should harm our community. That's not what they're for, or at least it's not what they're reported to be for. So how do we think about a way in which we can remove them from the equation so they're not in a position to harm our community members who are engaged in this work and still protect and support those who come in asking for support, asking for safety, asking for roads to justice? I think another thing that came up is at the last meeting, and I've heard this a lot, and Sid, you had mentioned something about wanting to make sure police or law enforcement wasn't handcuffed when trying to deal with these issues so that police can best support victims. And I guess I'm wondering, what does it mean for law enforcement agencies to be handcuffed? I don't take that as a metaphor. I've been in handcuffs. I have many friends who've been in handcuffs. But I've heard this from law enforcement in a lot of different issues of when we're trying to solve something, law enforcement feels handcuffed trying to help. And so what does that mean for you in this issue? What are the bureaucratic or logistical or like legal things that you have found to be detrimental to law enforcement in trying to address issues of trafficking?
Well, I don't remember saying that. But obviously, in what you started with where law enforcement is, right? So law enforcement has a duty and obligation based on the law to enforce the law. You're right, we're put in that position to go do that. And to Madam Chair's statement that different law enforcement officers approach the enforcement of different laws in different ways, certainly I'll agree that there are what may turn out to be biases, or I would look at it and say there's areas of our statutes that to me are more important than others in enforcement, right? And that's a wave that happens through law enforcement. We're going to go through one here pretty soon with decriminalization of marijuana, right? Mm-hmm. So to the metaphor of being in handcuffs or handcuffing what law enforcement is doing or can do, we rely on the courts when we're investigating something to be the neutral when we need to go, for instance, and get a search warrant, right? There's certain criteria that's put on law enforcement that says there's some things you can do that when you see it happening, you can take an action, but barring you seeing it from happening, you need to go to the courts to get the approval to take something to the next step, right? With like being to getting a search warrant or something like that. So let's use the example of we believe that there is some type of sex trafficking or it's brought to our attention of that. When we decriminalize the activity of a sex worker, we could rely on that when maybe obtaining a search warrant. If we decriminalize that activity, now there has to be a different avenue to show that there's some type of sex trafficking going on, right? So I'm just using that as an example, but anytime that there's a statute is changed to decriminalize some type of behavior for law enforcement, that just makes it an obstacle, I would say, put in place when then trying to do some type of an investigation towards it. So forgive me, I don't remember exactly saying that in any particular way, but I mean, that's how I would describe it in general.
Thank you.
Elena?
I want to say that I think that till now, we have done a really good job covering and hearing from people's testimonies about sex work, but we haven't done so well attending to the racial equity piece of our commission. And I do think that when that has come across, it has been the racialized and disproportionate policing of communities of color for prostitution under the guise of rescuing victims of human trafficking. And so in response to this need, this pressure, this obsession to find and prove cases of human trafficking, here in Rhode Island, we don't even just see, the need to possibly have prostitution as a legal category to arrest people, but we invented a whole, in 2016, category of unlicensed massage to be able to arrest unlicensed massage workers under the guise of possibilities of human trafficking. And time again, every single one of those, following investigation, has uncovered that human trafficking may not always be present. Because it's often difficult to adjudicate actually where law enforcement fit in and how we adjust statutes. I think there's a lot of creativity that's been implemented throughout the country, and creativity out of necessity. So in 2021, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, we see the DAs there declining to prosecute unlicensed massage and prostitution. So it remains criminal offense, but the DAs are declining to prosecute it specifically because of the enormous evidence that we're seeing of the different kinds of harms of criminalization and of those enduring records that exist for people. In the wake of that, I think the interesting momentum that we could look to or invite somebody to speak to us about are campaigns in New York that have asked to defund Vice, and the really vibrant conversations that have emerged of where those funds then get redistributed to the community. Because if we care about the so-called true victims, let us not use the potential that they are out there as a reason to continue criminalizing them, but can we turn these funds that have traditionally been allocated to policing towards other forms of widening the net of social services that people need. And this is not to say take funding from Vice and give it to anti-trafficking nonprofits. I think, to be very, very clear, I think the people who know what's happening on this panel have also shown that anti-trafficking organizations have been just as harmful to sex workers, their rights, as law enforcement has happened to be. So it's not that kind of a call, but how do we really, really be creative and spread it out to other kinds of organizations and efforts working at the grassroots? And by grassroots, that is almost always sex worker rights, migrant rights organizations that have been working in these communities for decades, even before trafficking at the national, international level becomes so flashy, has so much money attached to it. And I want to end with just by the numbers, something that was absolutely unacceptable in a ruling that came down last March following one of the last raids on the Pawtucket spas before COVID. They actually rule that even though not a instance of trafficking is found across these three spa raids that happened in December 2020, that the owner forfeit $650,000 of proceeds, assets, to the state, and that those were divided in an 80-20 split between the Pawtucket Police Department and the Rhode Island Attorney's General Office. So money that is coming and being confiscated under the guise of rescuing trafficking, when trafficking is not actually happening, is then becoming redistributed to our law enforcement that is often perpetuating the exact types of racialized policing that make migrant lives unlivable. and something that we could do in addition to getting caught up on legislature that talks about to decrim or not decrim is to really engage in national conversations around what defunding and reallocating resources actually means, since there seems to be millions of dollars out there to find quote unquote victims of trafficking, yet communities are saying almost all of those efforts target and harm the communities that they intend to serve. And I think that, you know, using the prospect of, as continually is done, like, well, what about the true victims out there who really need the help? That is, in some ways, it takes away from like the all of the voices and the work that is out there of people who may have the best connections to people who need help in various ways on this huge continuum of what trafficking is.
Interesting. Michael, I saw you had a whole page and a half over there wanting to share quickly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's actually, I have to go to the grocery store after this. No, I jest, probably inappropriately. A lot of things I want to say. First and most importantly, I want to say that I want to thank you, Madam Chair and Co-Chair Agello, for including the public defender in this effort. We're very, very grateful and honored that you chose to do that. I think in doing that, you recognize the very unique place that the public defender has in our system of justice, but especially in this context where we're representing both victims and defendants. What I mean is, I know I told some anecdotal stories, I guess, a few meetings ago about my own experience and that of my colleagues in representing those accused of prostitution, both indoors and outdoors. And also now, as we see the spillover from human trafficking, that we're representing victims also. I recall when the current law, the Uniform Act, was passed a number of years ago, that we made some specific contributions to the language regarding expungement because it had that uniform language and it didn't comport with Rhode Island law. So I appreciate that opportunity and the opportunity we've been given here. So as we appear to be transitioning from information gathering to figuring out recommendations, I think and would suggest what we need to do is, as hard as it's going to be, to try to find common ground. And I say that based on my experience, which of course pales to the experience of others, but my participation in several criminal justice stakeholder groups like this one that came forward and made recommendations on some really thorny issues regarding mistaken eyewitness identification, regarding racial profiling, regarding the recording of custodial interrogations, and there are a couple of others that escape me right now. But what was critical to those efforts and to the good work that was done is the hardest part, and that is trying to figure out where the common ground is here. And it may not exist. I think that it does, but I could be wrong. I think we can find common ground because I think the caliber and the quality of the presentations that we heard, they were just uniformly excellent. And I have to say, I like to think I know quite a bit about criminal justice issues, having been doing this kind of work for more than half of my life. But I learned a lot from our presenters, especially Steve Brown and Dr. Chen and the others that we heard from. The whole business about the changes in the law from 2009, to me, were just the situation we're in now. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but the situation we're in now came about as the result of happenstance. That analogy that we hear all the time about what happens in this building and about, the making of the sausage, right? Whoever the person was who said if you like lawmaking and you like sausage, you shouldn't watch either one being made. And yet, that's how our current law that has caused so much conversation in the last few months, that's how it came about. Lost in the midst of time about why indoor prostitution is now, or sex work is against the law. And I, was taken aback by that. The last commission that I served on, that held meetings in this room was on solitary confinement. And I remember going into those meetings thinking that I didn't think, shame on me, that I didn't think solitary confinement was as much of a problem in our prison compared to states like California or Louisiana as it was in those places. And I really was brought up short by hearing from the experts who came in and told us things that, shame on me, I did not know. I don't know where I'm at yet in this context, but one thing that these presentations did was at least to open my eyes about the fact that there are alternatives that may or may not be better social and criminal justice policy than what we have right now. So again, thank you, and I would again urge this group to, as hard as it may be, to try to find where that sweet spot in the middle is. I believe there is. I think we need to listen to one another. I think that's all that much more appropriate now, where we're, again, getting towards or moving towards the recommendation piece. Otherwise, we're not going to accomplish anything. Thank you.
I think, thank you, Michael. I think that we have, I agree with you that there is common ground here. It's almost to say, like, driver's license for undocumented. It was in play at one point in time, and just because someone with the power, the authority, removed that privilege, and it's the same thing. Sex work was legal here in the state of Rhode Island, and then someone in power chose to change that. So it wasn't as though it wasn't in play before, and we're trying to start something new. It's realistically, we're wondering and asking, what was the problem? And if there were problems, then let's sit down and work those problems out, opposed to just removing it in its entirety without any consideration of the individuals whom that is their source of income. That is their choice of their career. So it's unfair on many levels for that person or group of people to make a decision on a group of folks throughout the entire state of Rhode Island. And I keep my politics local simply because we're dealing with it. Yes, I know that other states are in fact dealing with similar situation, but it was in place. It was working. Any ills that may have come up should have been addressed, opposed to just wiping the whole opportunity and time just right out because you have the authority to do so. So I am very glad that we are working this out. It's going to take all of us to reach that common ground, and that's why I believe that we're here to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I want to not only hear from us, so that folks won't assume that we're one-sided, but I want to entertain, I want to welcome those individuals who feel a certain kind of way about the lifestyle, about folks' way of employment, way of life. Want to hear from them, because again, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I want to hear those, because it plays a role in what we're trying to do. Their opinions are also important, but again, it's not the whole package and caboodle, all that stuff. We're going to put it in there, we're going to work it out, we're going to answer, and we're going to present a great package, providing that entity, that person does not feel that it's necessary to throw in unnecessary stuff on the commission's plate to have to handle. So with that being said, Bella, 1, 2, or 3 questions that you would like to pose excuse me, 1 or 2 or 3 questions that you would like to pose to the commission.
Yes. I wanted to mimic off of what Lena was saying about the spa raids. We know in June of 2000, last year, Homeland raided 6 Asian massage over in Cranston. We have filed public records requests for every state and federal trafficking case going back 20 years, every prostitution, pandering, and promoting charge, because we want to look at how are the laws applied, who are they applied to, and the outcomes, because this shows us before while we were decriminalized and afterwards. So far, we're seeing an issue with the youth being charged, young adults. One of the common ground things, a solution they did in New York, is people under 21 cannot be charged with trafficking. You have a 17-year-old that drives another 17-year-old. The charging documents are showing that their friends and associates, which we call third-party staff, are the ones being charged with these things. An 18-year-old runs away with a 15-year-old. She gets a trafficking charge. We don't want to see the youth in trouble. We want to improve the youth system. We also see, I understand if we get decrim, they're just going to try to take it away like abortion. So some of the things we can do is talk about hate crime legislation. We're not protected by hate crime legislation. It's gender, race, sexuality, and religion. Immunity laws have to be that you can't be arrested. The trauma happens during the arrest when they put you on the news and you're now discriminated against future employment, child custody, and housing. When you can't access housing, you need a third party to get an apartment, and then you have to hope that person's not going to be exploitative. So we also know that there's a lot of information that's still being said. One of the flyers is that the average age of entry is 13. There's only been 18 trafficking cases in Rhode Island in 20 years. All the state ones, none of them were rescued by a sting or by sting. They were, parents reported the kids missing, a driver, even clients. So I think one of the other common ground things is we can all agree we want victims to be able to come forward, right? If a sex worker like myself comes across a victim, we would like me to be able to come forward and talk about that. If a client happens to find a victim, say shows up at a hotel room and he can tell she's 15 and not 25, we want them to be able to report it. So language is really important. When we start to label all our associates as traffickers and pimps and this and that. So I've been a sex worker 35 years. I still earn my living as a criminalized sex worker in Rhode Island. I choose to work alone, which you can understand makes it much more dangerous, but it's a misdemeanor. If I work with another person, even another woman my age, we can be charged with felony pandering or promoting. I've been to prison twice. I can't handle another felony. Every day I go to work, I risk being raped, robbed, murdered, or arrested. And when we talk about the policing, this is much like the drug laws, where we If you don't snitch on someone or give us information, all your associates and everyone you know, so you're isolating sex workers where they have no support and there's very little trust. We're also, the next generation of social worker school is now bringing in the trafficking narratives rather than teaching them to meet people where they are. So next month we will have our report done. We've had 3 research teams with a master's degree combing through literally tens of thousands of charging documents. One of the most disturbing things we found out is that thing like the TV show To Catch a Predator, where the police act like they're 14. There's dozens and dozens of those cases. And they're getting a 3-year suspended sentence and paying a fine and not even doing a year in jail. And I would think that maybe, how do we really protect our youth, provide the services youth needs? I also think there's a problem with 15-year-olds being in foster homes with 21-year-olds. When they age out, there needs to be halfway houses for 18 and older. You can't expect to put a 20-year-old with a 15-year-old and then charge them as they're an adult. So I think that's a problem. But thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Representative Ajoa?
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams, and thank you, Bella. Your information is very good, and I think you're speaking to data that we need to have. So I hope that when these reports are completed, you will provide them to the Commission with all the sources, all the documents, so that we can examine them and maybe follow up in some cases. But I couldn't agree more. We need data about arrest records, about charging, disposition of cases.
What I did bring today is the youth report
I
and a COVID report of how.
Hold on one second. You're requesting it now, or you're requesting it?
My understanding is that those reports have not been completed yet.
Yeah, the charging document.
I
I'll have
would
that next
like
month.
you to get them to us. I think data, that sort of information is the kind of thing that lawmakers need when they're making laws. We get into trouble when we make laws based on anecdotes. And so I urge you to get that data, those reports to us, and I urge the Commission to look at them all carefully. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on some comments other commissioners made. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Elena, for some things, and just thinking more about, what are we doing here and how can we be complete and holistic in how we address this issue and recognize the impacts that our current law has had and will continue to have on folks who've been affected by it. And so one thing I would like to request from the chair and the co-chair is if we can hear from housing advocates about particularly how unhoused and homeless folks are impacted by these laws, because we know that I know from experience that many unhoused folks, especially queer youth and women, have to turn to sex work. Also how substance abuse and harm reduction can be a part of our understanding of how to better resources for folks who've been targeted by our laws. And I'd also really, if we are able to hear from formerly incarcerated sex workers, and specifically, not just what their experience in prison or what their experience in incarceration or their experience with sex work has been, but particularly how coming out of incarceration has been affecting them. It's crucial as we're thinking of these laws and we're thinking about decriminalization that we have means for expungement, as Michael said. But something I think we don't talk about enough when we talk about expungement is the restitution that these people are owed for having served time for something we now consider legal. What does it mean to come out with a record and have to try to find housing, to have to try to find people to live with if you can no longer live with your family or your loved ones? What does it mean to try to find a job because we know our ban the box laws are not enforced? What does it mean to not have money? What if you were in there for 10 years and technology has changed drastically? If you don't have a working history that you can put on paper. All of these things are things that we actually should be supporting our formerly incarcerated sex workers with. And so what does it mean to turn funding from punishment to restitution? What does it mean? Because we know expungement also, we can say it's automatic, but I mean, any of the legal folks can correct me in the room that it's not actually a snap of the fingers with expungement. It actually does take a little bit of time for the courts to work through that system. And so what are the funding sources that we're going to give folks who are decriminalized, who are released as a result of our work, so that they can restart their lives and so that they can lead their lives with dignity after we have punished them? I think the last thing I'll say, right, is when I think of two consenting adults freely choosing to engage in sexual activity with another consenting adult, that's a matter of agency. It's a right to do with your body as you choose. And the only reason we can criminalize that is because we've decided it's immoral, that this is a moral crime. And if we're talking about, you know, we don't want people to do certain things. I don't like tomatoes, but that doesn't mean I can stop people from buying, selling, and growing tomatoes, right? And so I don't really think for me, I'll just say there's not going to be a common ground. We either support people's right to agency or we don't. We either support people's rights to make their own decisions about their body or we don't. And if we don't, then we should take the responsibility for knowing how that's going to harm our community and own up to it. We're not going to find a place where we decide people can't do things with their body that aren't harming other people, where I think that's acceptable as a government.
Thank you. I just want to say to close out the meeting is that common ground to me is just not one definition, simply because of the fact that one of the points that were repeatedly being said that caused the governor to, at that time, to, criminalize sex work was because of the open street walkers that was taking place, in neighborhoods that residents were, appalled, per se, feeling the disruption of their space. So when I say common ground, I mean common ground where there will be, a list of do's and don'ts and stuff in that order to be clear and understanding that, yes, I believe that it's your body, it's your right, you make the decision that best fits your lifestyle or your situation. However, I think that respect also needs to be extended to the general public who is not involved in that way of living, whether you want to call it a career or what have you. But doing it in my backyard, meaning literally in the side of my house because it's convenient, the john is ready, the sex worker is ready, or whatever the case may be. I think that that part of it, that's something as far as common ground that I would not be open to say, oh, well, hey, didn't hurt anybody kind of thing. So when I say common ground, we need to know that for me, it's not just one definition in common ground that it is or it isn't. Absolutely, it is your body, it is your choice, it's your decision, but not only respect yourself, respect those that it also impacts in that sense.
Yeah, and I understand that. Respectfully, a lot of the conditions we've created for sex workers, including what you're talking about with folks being in certain areas or being in certain neighborhoods, is because we've criminalized sex workers. It's because we've denied them housing. That to me isn't a concern. And we can maybe talk about if we want to have zoning for sex workers, but that's unrealistic. It's unrealistic for us to think we're going to control people's behavior in every time and space, because we don't do that with other things, unless we're criminalizing them and unless we're using our money to punish them. That's the only way that happens, unless neighborhoods can work it out themselves, and that can be okay. And I also, yeah.
Okay, Henry, and you will be the closeout, okay? Thank you.
Just a couple quick notes, just talking about, like, you brought up, zoning for sex work. In Australia, there are districts of establishments, in their decriminalized states where people are able to go to a place of work and not disturb the greater public. But again, this is also a conversation based in stigma. It's not as if people in paper-cut neighborhoods aren't engaging in sexual activity. It's not as if they're not consuming pornography. I'm not gonna say I'm confident that everyone in this room has at least accidentally stumbled upon, but the fact of the matter is like, we are a species that engages in sexual activity as a means of socialization, as a means of therapy. There are a lot of avenues that sex work takes that are healing, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. I engaged in sex work to get to where I am today, to have this conversation. It's not a matter of, when we're talking, and honestly, what's frustrating is, like, we're, at the end of the day, we're talking about a marginalized community. So, like, speaking about neighborhood conveniences and censorship versus the very real oppression that people are facing in this criminalized labor, it's apples to oranges. And it's gonna be a longer conversation beyond decriminalization. It's gonna have to look like anti-discrimination bills. It's gonna have to look like creative thinking. It's not gonna be as simple as, like, okay, go do what you're gonna do. There's a lot of reparation that needs to be done, probably long past the expiration of this study commission, but it can be a collaborative process. I think that everybody involved needs to get ready to be uncomfortable. And that's it. Change is pretty uncomfortable. Progress can be really uncomfortable.
So everybody needs to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I often say that. The fact of the matter is, conversation is good. It's a good thing. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone that are here, that came, both as the commission and as our audience, to continue the conversation with regards to decriminalizing sex work. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, for sure. And with that, till next time, I thank you all.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.